The mother-in-law only came because rich people never miss free champagne, my son-in-law Jason said into the microphone, smiling while 200 people laughed around him. I remember the exact sound my champagne glass made when I placed it carefully onto the white linen tablecloth. A soft click. Small. Controlled. Almost invisible beneath the music and laughter filling the ballroom on the 32nd floor of the Palmer Hotel in downtown Chicago. No one noticed that sound except me. I sat there beneath the golden lights while Jason adjusted his expensive navy suit and soaked in the applause from his coworkers. The city skyline glowed behind him through towering glass windows, and for a brief moment, I wondered how a room could feel so crowded and so lonely at the same time. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 68 years old, widowed, and until that night, I still believed dignity could survive inside a family that no longer respected me. Jason raised his champagne flute again, grinning like a man who believed the world belonged to him now. Come on, he continued into the microphone, his voice smooth with confidence. You all know I'm kidding. Eleanor never misses an open bar. More laughter followed, louder this time. A few people glanced toward me awkwardly before quickly looking away. Nobody wants to stand too close to humiliation when it's happening in public. My daughter Rebecca sat 3 seats away from me, wearing a silver satin dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. She lowered her eyes into her wine glass and pretended not to hear him. That hurt more than Jason's joke ever could. I had spent 38 years protecting Rebecca from disappointment, from pain, from the ugliness of the world. Yet there she sat while her husband reduced me to a punchline in front of executives, investors, and strangers who suddenly looked at me as if I truly were some lonely old woman desperate for free food and sparkling wine. I smiled gently because women my age learn something important over time. The moment you react emotionally in public, people stop listening to your dignity and start studying your embarrassment instead. So I crossed my legs carefully beneath the table and looked around the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above us. Servers carried trays of crab cakes and filet mignon sliders between tables dressed in white roses and floating candles. A jazz trio played softly near the dance floor while Jason's company celebrated his promotion to regional financial director. Everyone kept calling him self-made tonight. That phrase almost made me laugh. Self-made. I remembered the winter Rebecca called me crying because Jason couldn't make his MBA tuition payment. I remembered wiring $12,000 from the savings account my late husband and I had spent decades building. I remembered introducing Jason to Thomas Bennett at a Christmas charity dinner 6 years ago. Thomas sat on the executive board of the very company Jason now worked for. One introduction changed his entire career. Self-made men rarely mention the hands that carried them across the river. Jason continued thanking coworkers and mentors while applause rolled through the ballroom every few minutes. Then his eyes landed on me again. And of course, he said dramatically, special thanks to my mother-in-law Eleanor for teaching us all that retirement is really just professional freeloading. This time, even the band members stopped smiling. The joke lingered too long in the air. Cold, sharp, deliberate. I noticed one woman near the bar quietly lower her champagne glass. Another man shifted uncomfortably beside his wife. People were beginning to realize this wasn't harmless teasing anymore. Jason wasn't joking. He was displaying me. I folded my napkin slowly onto the table and stood. Rebecca finally looked at me then, her expression nervous but passive, like someone watching bad weather through a closed window. Mom, she whispered softly, but I simply touched her shoulder and smiled. Congratulations on the beautiful evening, I said calmly. My voice surprised even me. Steady, warm, untouched. Then I picked up my purse and walked toward the ballroom exit beneath the soft golden lights of the hotel corridor. Behind me, the applause slowly returned, awkward and uncertain now. Jason thought he had won something that night. Respect, power, superiority. But what he didn't know was that half the people clapping for him only trusted him because of me. And by the following Monday morning, that microphone joke would become the most expensive sentence he had ever spoken. The elevator ride down from the ballroom felt strangely peaceful. Soft piano music drifted through hidden speakers while the mirrored walls reflected a woman who looked calm on the outside and exhausted somewhere much deeper. I stood alone beside a young couple laughing quietly over photographs on their phones, and for a moment I wondered if Rebecca and I had ever looked that happy together. Chicago glowed beyond the glass lobby windows when I stepped outside into the cool September air. The city smelled like rain and car exhaust, an expensive perfume drifting from the valet entrance. I wrapped my coat tighter around my shoulders and declined the valet attendant when he offered to bring my car around faster. I needed the walk. My heels clicked softly against the sidewalk as I made my way past restaurants crowded with people enjoying Friday night dinners. 20 years ago, I used to love downtown evenings like this. My husband Charles and I would drive into the city after work, share cheesecake at a little cafe near Michigan Avenue, and talk about Rebecca's future like proud parents building a dream together. Charles believed in people too easily. That was one of the reasons I loved him. It was also one of the reasons I learned to become more careful after he passed away. By the time I reached my condominium building near Lakeshore Drive, my feet ached and my chest felt heavy in that familiar quiet way grief sometimes returns years later without warning. Not grief for death this time. Grief for disappointment. I greeted the night doorman with a smile and rode the elevator to the 12th floor. The moment my front door closed behind me, the silence settled around me like cold fabric. I placed my purse carefully on the kitchen counter and stood there without turning on the lights. The city skyline shimmered through the windows above Lake Michigan, beautiful and distant. Then my phone buzzed. Rebecca. I stared at her name for several seconds before answering. Mom, she said softly, her voice tense. Please do not make tonight into something bigger than it was. I closed my eyes briefly. Your husband humiliated me in front of 200 people. A long pause followed. I could hear muffled music and voices behind her. She was still at the party. Jason was joking, she replied quietly. Everyone jokes like that at corporate events. I walked slowly toward the kitchen sink and filled a glass with water. No, sweetheart, I said gently. Not everyone does. Another silence. Then came the sentence that hurt more than the others. You know how important tonight was for him. For him. Not for us. Not for family. Not for dignity. Just for him. I looked out at the dark water beyond the windows and suddenly remembered Rebecca at 8 years old sitting beside me at our old kitchen table while I helped her color construction paper angels for a school project. She used to hold my arm when she crossed parking lots because she was afraid of cars. She used to cry whenever I left her at summer camp. Somewhere along the way, that little girl disappeared and became a woman who apologized for cruelty because it came wrapped in success. I am tired, Rebecca, I said quietly. We will talk another time. She exhaled sharply. Mom, please do not punish Jason over one stupid joke. That sentence stopped me completely. Punish. The word lingered in the kitchen like smoke. I realized then that Jason had already told her something. Fear does not enter a conversation unless someone knows there is something to lose. After we hung up, I sat alone at the dining table beneath the small brass light fixture Charles installed himself 15 years ago. I opened the drawer beside me and removed an old leather file organizer. Inside were decades of paperwork I rarely touched anymore. Tax records, investment agreements, loan guarantees, business contacts, quiet pieces of history nobody in that ballroom tonight had bothered to remember. I slowly turned each page until my fingers stopped on a familiar name. Jason Carter. Beneath it sat the original documents connected to the executive investment trust that helped launch his corporate partnership 6 years earlier. My signature remained at the bottom of every page. Final approval authority, Eleanor Whitmore. I leaned back slowly in my chair while the city lights flickered beyond the windows. Then for the first time that entire evening, I smiled. I barely slept that night. The city outside my windows slowly shifted from midnight black to soft gray while I sat at the dining table with Charles's old leather file organizer open in front of me. Around 3 in the morning, I made tea and reread every page connected to Jason's executive partnership agreement. Some signatures fade with time. Mine had not. By 7:30, Chicago was fully awake. Car horns echoed faintly from Lakeshore Drive, while sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors of my condominium. I stood in the kitchen wearing a cream-colored sweater and stared at the framed photograph near the coffee maker. Rebecca and Jason on their wedding day. She looked radiant in lace and pearls. He looked proud, polished, ambitious. I remembered how tightly he shook my hand at the reception after I gave my speech. I will take care of her forever, he told me that night. Funny how people always sound sincere when they still need something from you. My phone rang just after 8. Thomas Bennett. I had not spoken to him in nearly 6 months. "Good morning, Eleanor," he said carefully. His voice always sounded calm, even when delivering bad news. "I assume you saw Jason last night." I walked slowly toward the windows overlooking the lake. The entire city probably heard him last night. Thomas sighed quietly. I was afraid of that. Something in his tone sharpened my attention immediately. Thomas did not waste words. "What happened?" I asked. Papers shuffled softly on his end before he answered. "There is a financial review happening inside Carter and Ridgewell. Quiet for now. Only senior leadership knows." My fingers tightened slightly around the coffee mug. Carter and Ridgewell was Jason's company. What kind of review? Another pause. Expense allocation discrepancies. Offshore transfers. Bonus restructuring. I closed my eyes briefly. Corporate language always tries to soften ugly things. How serious? Thomas lowered his voice. Serious enough that the board is reviewing all executive authorization chains connected to investment approvals. Then he added carefully, "Your name still appears on several of those documents." The room suddenly felt very still. I looked out toward the water while memories began sliding together in my mind, like puzzle pieces finally locking into place. Jason's sudden panic whenever financial topics came up. Rebecca defending him too quickly. The expensive vacations. The new Range Rover. The enormous lake house in Wisconsin they supposedly bought with cash. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked quietly. "Because if this escalates, someone may try to shift responsibility before the audit becomes public." His words settled heavily into my chest. Thomas had always respected Charles, and after Charles died, he looked after me in small, quiet ways. If he was calling now, he believed I was in danger of becoming useful to someone. Or disposable. "Do they suspect Jason directly?" I finally asked. "Nothing official yet," Thomas replied carefully. "But people inside the company are nervous. Especially after last night." I frowned slightly. "What does last night have to do with this?" Thomas hesitated for the first time in our conversation. "Eleanor, powerful people notice character flaws. Humiliating your mother-in-law publicly at your own promotion party is not the behavior of a stable executive." I almost laughed at that. After everything Jason had done, it was a microphone joke that finally made wealthy men uncomfortable. Corporate America had strange moral boundaries. "Thank you for warning me," I said softly. "I thought you deserved context before someone else contacts you," Thomas replied. Then his tone shifted slightly warmer. "For what it is worth, many people in that ballroom last night were embarrassed for him. Not for you." After we hung up, I stood motionless in the middle of my kitchen for several minutes. Somewhere downstairs, a dog barked in the hallway. A siren echoed faintly from the street below. Life continued normally while mine quietly changed direction. Then my phone buzzed again. This time it was Jason himself. I stared at his name across the screen while sunlight touched the edge of Charles's photograph beside me. The call rang once, twice, 3 times. I let it go to voicemail. Seconds later, another notification appeared. A text message. "Mom, I think we should talk soon. There are some important financial matters we need to review together." I read the message twice before setting the phone face down on the counter. Last night, he called me a freeloader in front of strangers. This morning, he suddenly remembered I mattered. Jason called 4 more times before noon. I did not answer any of them. By early afternoon, his text messages had shifted in tone from casual confidence to nervous politeness. I think there may be some misunderstandings. Then, "Rebecca is very upset. Finally, please call me back when you can." I left every message unread after the preview notification appeared across my screen. There is a strange silence that enters people once they realize the person they mocked might actually hold power over them. I spent the afternoon doing ordinary things. I watered the plants on my balcony overlooking Lake Michigan. I folded laundry while an old Frank Sinatra album played softly through the speakers Charles installed years ago. I even walked 3 blocks to a neighborhood bakery for coffee and a blueberry muffin. The young woman behind the counter smiled warmly and called me sweetheart while handing me my change. Funny how strangers often show more kindness than family. Around 4 o'clock, I returned home and found Rebecca sitting outside my condominium door. She stood quickly when she saw me approaching, clutching her designer handbag tightly against her chest like a nervous teenager waiting outside the principal's office. Her eyes looked tired. "Mom," she said softly. I unlocked the door without answering immediately and motioned for her to come inside. Rebecca walked slowly into the living room, glancing around the condo she practically grew up in. The same cream-colored sofa. The same piano Charles bought me on our 20th anniversary. The same framed family photographs lining the shelves, although lately they felt more like evidence than memories. "Do you want tea?" I asked calmly. Rebecca blinked as if she expected anger instead of politeness. "Sure." I prepared chamomile tea while she sat stiffly at the kitchen island, watching me carefully. The silence between us felt old somehow, like it had been building for years without either of us admitting it. Finally, Rebecca exhaled shakily. "Jason said you were ignoring him." I placed her teacup gently in front of her. "I am thinking." "About what?" I looked at her for a long moment before answering. "About when exactly you stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a problem." Her face tightened immediately. "That is not fair." I almost smiled at that. Children always call honesty unfair when it arrives too late. Rebecca wrapped both hands around the teacup, but did not drink from it. "Jason knows he went too far at the party." "No," I replied softly. "Jason knows he may need something from me now." That sentence landed heavily between us. Rebecca looked away first. Outside the windows, gray clouds drifted slowly across the lake, while distant boat horns echoed faintly through the afternoon air. "Thomas Bennett contacted the company this morning," she admitted quietly. "Jason is under pressure." There it was. Not an apology. Not concern for me. Pressure. I leaned back slightly in my chair. "Did Jason tell you why?" Rebecca hesitated too long. "There are some accounting questions. Nothing serious." "You sound exactly like his lawyers already." Her eyes flashed with frustration then. "Mom, why are you acting like you want him to fail?" I stared at her in disbelief for several seconds before answering. "Rebecca, your husband humiliated me publicly less than 24 hours ago. He spent years treating me like an embarrassment while benefiting from things I quietly provided. And somehow you still believe I am the dangerous one in this situation." Tears gathered in her eyes then, but I noticed something important. She still defended him first. "You do not understand how stressful his position is," she whispered. "No," I said calmly. "I understand perfectly. I helped build it." The room fell silent after that. Rebecca looked at me differently for the first time all afternoon, as though she suddenly remembered there had once been a life before Jason entered ours. A successful one. Independent. Respected. I stood slowly and walked toward the hallway cabinet beside the piano. Then I removed a thin gray folder and placed it gently onto the kitchen counter between us. Rebecca frowned slightly. "What is that?" I looked directly into her eyes. "The original partnership authorization documents that allowed Jason into executive investment management 6 years ago." Her face lost color almost immediately. "Mom, he never told you whose signature made that possible, did he?" Rebecca stared at the gray folder on my kitchen counter as though it contained something dangerous. In a way, it did. Not because the papers themselves were dramatic, but because truth becomes dangerous once people spend years building their lives around a lie. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the folder and scanned the first page. I watched her eyes move lower and lower until they stopped on my signature at the bottom. "Eleanor Whitmore. Final Approval Authority." "I never knew this existed," she whispered. "Of course you did not," I replied calmly. "Jason prefers stories where he succeeds alone." Rebecca sat back slowly in her chair while afternoon lights stretched across the marble countertop between us. The silence in the condo no longer felt tense now. It felt revealing, like old wallpaper peeling away from a wall one corner at a time. "He told me one of the partners sponsored him personally," she said quietly. I almost smiled. "I introduced Jason to those partners after he was rejected twice." Rebecca lowered her eyes immediately. Somewhere deep inside her, pieces were beginning to shift. I could see it happening in real time. Not because she suddenly understood me completely, but because for the first time in years, the version of Jason she defended so fiercely no longer matched the evidence sitting in front of her. She turned another page slowly. Loan guarantees. Investment access approvals. Reference letters. Every quiet favor I had ever protected him with was sitting neatly inside that folder while the man himself walked around pretending I contributed nothing except awkward holiday dinners and unwanted opinions. "Why did you never tell me?" she asked softly. I leaned back in my chair and looked toward the windows where rain had begun falling lightly against the glass. "Because helping family is not supposed to become a scoreboard." Her eyes filled with tears again. Mom. No, sweetheart, I interrupted gently. Listen carefully now, because I do not think anyone has told you the truth in a very long time. Rebecca went still. Your husband built an image around ambition. Expensive suits, executive dinners, luxury vacations. But ambition without gratitude eventually turns into entitlement. And entitlement always becomes cruelty once someone believes they no longer need the people who helped them climb. She looked down at the folder again without speaking. I stood slowly and walked toward the piano near the living room windows. My fingertips brushed lightly across the polished wood while old memories surfaced one after another. Rebecca at 16 practicing Christmas songs beside Charles. Rebecca crying after her first heartbreak in college. Rebecca introducing Jason to us for the first time at a small Italian restaurant downtown. Back then he looked nervous and eager and grateful for every opportunity. Success changed him slowly enough that none of us noticed at first. Did you know he called me outdated at a dinner with his coworkers last spring? I asked quietly. Rebecca blinked. What? I turned toward her calmly. He laughed and said I still balance checkbooks like it is 1995. Her expression shifted with genuine surprise now. I thought he was joking. People often hide disrespect inside humor, I said softly. That way they can wound you and still blame you for feeling hurt. Rain continued tapping gently against the windows while downtown Chicago disappeared behind gray clouds. Rebecca closed the folder carefully and pressed both hands against it as if grounding herself. Then her phone buzzed loudly against the counter. Jason. She stared at his name for several seconds before answering. Where are you? He asked immediately. Even from across the kitchen, I could hear tension in his voice. Rebecca glanced toward me uncertainly. I am with Mom. A pause followed. Then Jason lowered his voice. Do not discuss anything financial with her until I get there. That sentence changed everything. Rebecca slowly lifted her eyes toward mine, while understanding finally settled across her face. Not complete understanding. Not yet. But enough. Enough to realize this was never really about jokes or misunderstandings or oversensitivity. It was about fear. Jason was afraid now. And frightened people always reveal who they truly are once they realize the person they underestimated may no longer be willing to protect them. Rebecca ended the call without another word. The moment her phone screen went dark, the kitchen felt different somehow. Quieter. Heavier. Like the truth had finally entered the room and neither of us knew where to place it. She stared down at the gray folder for several long seconds before speaking again. He sounded scared. I poured more hot water into the teapot slowly, watching steam curl upward beneath the kitchen lights. Yes, I said softly. He did. Rebecca rubbed her forehead with trembling fingers. For the first time since arriving at my condominium, she no longer looked defensive. She looked exhausted. I recognized that expression immediately. It was the face people make when loyalty and reality begin pulling them in opposite directions. Mom, she whispered carefully. If something is happening at the company, maybe Jason just panicked. Maybe he feels trapped. I set the teapot down gently. Do you know what trapped people usually do, Rebecca? She looked up at me uncertainly. They look for someone softer to stand beneath them. Her eyes filled again, but this time she did not argue. Rain continued sliding down the windows while evening slowly settled across Chicago. The lake beyond the glass had turned dark steel gray beneath the clouds. I carried my teacup into the living room and sat beside the window overlooking the city lights flickering awake one building at a time. Rebecca followed quietly and sat across from me on the sofa Charles and I bought during our 30th wedding anniversary trip to Boston. Some furniture survives marriages better than people do. Do you remember the year after your father died? I asked gently. Rebecca nodded slowly. You could barely sleep. Neither could you, I replied. Every night you called me because you were afraid the world was falling apart. Her expression softened immediately. I was 34 years old and still crying like a child. Because grief does not care about age. The room fell quiet again. Then I looked directly at her. Do you know who stayed awake helping Jason reorganize his business proposal after his investors backed out that same year? Rebecca blinked. You? I smiled faintly. 3 nights in a row. I sat at this exact coffee table correcting spreadsheets while he paced around this room talking about how he was terrified of failing you. She looked genuinely stunned now. He never told me that. No, I said quietly. He did not. The memories came back more clearly now that I allowed myself to revisit them. Jason arriving at my condo in wrinkled shirts carrying stacks of financial projections. Jason thanking me repeatedly after I connected him with Thomas Bennett. Jason promising me he would never forget everything I had done for him. Somewhere between ambition and success, gratitude disappeared from him piece by piece until eventually all that remained was image. Expensive watches, luxury dinners, public confidence built on private dependence. Rebecca lowered her voice carefully. Do you think he used you? That question lingered painfully between us. I looked toward the rain-covered windows before answering. I think Jason convinced himself that needing help was temporary, so appreciating it became inconvenient. She swallowed hard after that. Then another silence settled across the room until suddenly someone knocked at the front door. 3 quick knocks. Sharp. Urgent. Rebecca looked toward the hallway immediately. That is him. I remained seated for a moment before calmly standing. When I opened the door, Jason stood there drenched from the rain despite the black umbrella folded tightly in his hand. His expensive charcoal coat was spotted with water, and his carefully styled hair looked uneven for the first time in years. Success had always fit him like armor. Tonight cracks were finally visible. Eleanor, he said quickly. No joke this time. No smirk. No performance. Just tension. I stepped aside silently and allowed him inside. Jason entered the condo carefully, his eyes immediately landing on the gray folder resting on the coffee table beside Rebecca. The color drained slightly from his face. You showed her the documents? He asked quietly. I closed the front door behind him. I showed my daughter the truth. Jason loosened his jaw slowly, struggling to regain composure. Then he looked directly at me in a way he had not done for years. Not as an aging inconvenience. Not as background decoration at family dinners. But as someone capable of affecting his future. We need to discuss this privately, he said. I folded my hands calmly in front of me and held his gaze without blinking. No, Jason, I replied softly. I think we finally need to discuss everything openly. Jason remained standing near the doorway while rainwater dripped quietly from the edge of his coat onto the hardwood floor. For a man who built his entire identity around control, he suddenly looked painfully unprepared. Rebecca sat frozen on the sofa between us, her hands clasped tightly together while tension settled across the room like fog. I walked calmly back toward the living room and took my seat beside the window again. Close the door properly, Jason, I said softly. He turned immediately and pushed it shut before loosening his tie with shaky fingers. It was the first time I had ever seen him nervous inside my home. Usually he entered this condominium with polished confidence, kissing Rebecca distractedly while scrolling through emails, barely acknowledging my presence before discussing business calls and investment dinners. Tonight he looked like a man trying to stop a leak with his bare hands. Eleanor, he began carefully. There are details here Rebecca does not fully understand. I almost smiled at that sentence. Powerful men always believe women are confused whenever the truth becomes inconvenient. Then explain them, I replied. Calmly. Jason glanced briefly toward the gray folder on the coffee table before sitting slowly across from me. The company is conducting a routine internal review, he said. That is normal for executive transitions. Rebecca looked at him immediately. You told me it was nothing serious. Because it is not, he answered too quickly. I watched his jaw tighten afterward. He was lying faster now. Sloppier. Fear was beginning to crack his performance. Thomas Bennett contacted me this morning, I said quietly. Jason's eyes shifted toward me instantly. Thomas had no right to involve you. Interesting, I replied. You seemed very eager to involve me 6 years ago when you needed my signature. Silence. Heavy and immediate. Rebecca slowly turned toward her husband. What exactly did Mom sign? Jason rubbed both hands together before answering. There was an investment authorization requirement tied to the executive partnership structure. Eleanor's financial backing helped accelerate the process. I held his gaze calmly. That is a very elegant way to describe dependence. Rebecca blinked repeatedly, trying to piece everything together. Wait, your promotion happened because of Mom. Jason exhaled sharply. No, my work earned the promotion. But my connections opened the door, I said softly. And my financial guarantees protected your early investments when nobody else trusted you. He looked away after that. Outside, thunder rolled faintly somewhere above the lake, while evening darkened the skyline beyond my windows. Rebecca stood slowly from the sofa now, pacing toward the kitchen island with visible confusion. "Why would you hide this from me?" she asked quietly. Jason followed her with his eyes, but did not answer immediately. "Because it was not relevant anymore," he finally muttered. I felt something inside me turn cold at those words. Not angry, not hurt, just clear. "People are never irrelevant simply because you finished using them," I said. Jason stood abruptly then. "That is not what I meant." "No." I tilted my head slightly. "Then explain the jokes. Explain the comments at dinners. Explain why my own daughter now sounds nervous every time your career is threatened." Rebecca stopped pacing immediately. Jason looked trapped now, caught between defending himself and protecting the image he spent years building. "I made mistakes," he admitted carefully. "But this situation is becoming bigger than it needs to be." There it was again. Not remorse. Management. He still believed this was a public relations problem instead of a character problem. I stood slowly and walked toward the bookshelf near the piano. Then I removed another thin folder from the lower cabinet drawer beneath it. Jason's face changed the moment he saw it. "What is that?" he asked quietly. "The offshore transfer records connected to the Lake Geneva property investment," I replied. Rebecca frowned immediately. "The lake house." I looked directly at Jason before answering. "Yes, the one purchased under the consulting subsidiary account your company is currently auditing." Rebecca's mouth slowly parted in disbelief. "Jason." He stepped forward quickly now, panic finally visible beneath his carefully controlled voice. "Eleanor, listen to me carefully before you misunderstand what those documents mean." I held the folder gently in my hands and looked at him with complete calm. "I think the bigger problem now," I said softly, "is that I finally understand exactly what they mean." The room fell completely silent after my words. Rain pressed harder against the windows now, blurring the Chicago skyline into streaks of silver and gold beyond the glass. Jason stood motionless in the middle of my living room while Rebecca stared at him as though she no longer recognized the man she married. I held the folder calmly against my side and watched panic slowly replace confidence in his face. "The lake house was approved through the consulting subsidiary?" Rebecca asked quietly. Jason swallowed hard before answering. "It was temporary accounting structure management. Nothing illegal." I noticed how carefully he chose his words now. Men only become precise when consequences finally arrive. "Then why is the property attached to an offshore account?" I asked softly. His eyes snapped toward mine immediately. "You went through private records?" I almost laughed at the audacity of that question. "Jason," I replied calmly, "my signature appears on those authorizations. They stopped being private the moment you tied my name to them." Rebecca slowly stepped backward until the edge of the kitchen counter touched her hips. "Tell me the truth," she whispered to him. "Right now." Jason removed both hands from his pockets and ran them through his damp hair. "The company encouraged certain executives to move assets strategically during expansion. Everyone did it." "That is not an answer," Rebecca said sharply. Her voice cracked slightly beneath the weight of betrayal. Jason exhaled heavily and looked away. "The house was purchased through a deferred compensation structure." "Using company funds?" I asked. Another silence. Then he nodded once. Very small, very defeated. Rebecca covered her mouth immediately. I watched her carefully then because heartbreak does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it enters quietly, one realization at a time, until the person you trusted becomes impossible to recognize. "You told me your bonus paid for that house," she whispered. Jason stepped toward her quickly. "Rebecca, listen to me. I was going to fix everything before the audit finished." "By doing what?" she asked. "Lying longer?" The storm outside deepened while tension settled into every corner of the room. Somewhere down below, headlights moved through wet streets like blurred ribbons of white and red. My condominium suddenly felt smaller than it ever had before. Smaller and painfully honest. Jason turned toward me again then, desperation replacing pride completely now. "Eleanor, I need your help." There it was. Finally. Not a joke. Not a performance. Not polite tolerance disguised as family affection. Need. I looked at him quietly while memories moved through my mind one after another. The tuition checks. The introductions. The investment approvals. Every invisible bridge I built beneath him while he climbed higher pretending he reached everything alone. "What exactly do you think I can do for you?" I asked softly. He stepped closer now, lowering his voice. Your authorization status still carries influence with the board review. If you confirm, the transfers were approved investment restructuring. This could stay internal. Rebecca stared at him in disbelief. You want my mother to protect you after everything? Jason looked genuinely frustrated now. I am trying to protect all of us. No, I said calmly. You are trying to protect yourself. He opened his mouth to argue, but his phone suddenly rang loudly in his coat pocket. Jason froze the moment he saw the caller ID. Carter and Ridgewell Executive Compliance Division. The color drained from his face almost instantly. Rebecca whispered softly, "Answer it." He hesitated before finally accepting the call. Jason Carter speaking. The voice on the other end spoke quietly enough that neither Rebecca nor I could hear the exact words, but we did not need to. We watched his expression change minute by minute. Shock first, then disbelief, then fear. Real fear. Effective immediately, he asked weakly. Another pause followed. I understand. When the call ended, the room remained perfectly still. Jason lowered the phone slowly without looking at either of us. They suspended my financial access pending investigation, he said quietly. Rebecca sat down heavily on the sofa behind her as tears filled her eyes. Jason looked toward me then with the hollow expression of a man watching his carefully constructed life begin collapsing in real time. Please, he whispered softly, do not let them destroy me. I held his gaze for several long seconds before answering. Jason, I said gently, I did not destroy you. I simply stopped standing between you and the consequences of your own choices. 3 months later, Chicago was covered in the soft gold colors of late autumn when I took my granddaughter Lily to a small ice cream shop near Navy Pier. The air smelled like cinnamon and roasted nuts from street vendors lining the sidewalk, and Lake Michigan shimmered quietly beneath pale afternoon sunlight. Lily sat across from me, swinging her legs beneath the booth, while chocolate ice cream stained the corners of her smile. Grandma, she said happily, Mom says you make the best pancakes in the whole world. I laughed softly and handed her another napkin. Children have a beautiful way of restoring warmth to places adults nearly destroy. Life had changed quickly after the night Jason came to my condominium. Carter and Ridgewell launched a full investigation into the Executive Financial Division less than 48 hours later. Several offshore transfers connected to luxury property purchases were flagged internally, including the Lake Geneva house. Jason was never arrested. There were no dramatic courtroom scenes or police sirens like television shows love to invent. Real consequences are usually quieter than that. His promotion disappeared first, then his executive access. Then the invitations stopped coming. Corporate friendships often vanish the moment someone no longer controls money. Rebecca moved out of the lake house 6 weeks after the investigation began. She and Lily rented a smaller condominium closer to downtown, while she tried to rebuild a version of herself that no longer revolved around protecting Jason's image. Some nights, she still cried when she called me. Not because she missed wealth or status, but because betrayal feels different when it arrives slowly through years of excuses and half-truths. Jason attempted to contact me many times after that night. At first, he sent long messages explaining pressure and stress in corporate culture. Later, the messages became shorter. Simpler. I am sorry. I should have treated you better. I never thought things would go this far. I read every message exactly once before quietly deleting them. Forgiveness and access are not always the same thing. Around us, families walked along the waterfront wrapped in scarves and jackets while tour boats drifted slowly across the lake. Lily carefully pushed rainbow sprinkles around her paper cup before looking up at me. Mom says Grandpa Charles would have liked this place. My chest tightened gently at the sound of his name. He would have loved it, I said softly. Charles always believed families could survive anything as long as people remained honest with each other. I used to think that was true too. Now I believe something slightly different. Families only survive when respect survives first. Without respect, love slowly turns into obligation, and obligation eventually becomes resentment wearing polite clothes. Lily reached across the table suddenly and squeezed my hand with her tiny fingers. Are you sad, Grandma? She asked quietly. I looked out toward the water for a moment before answering honestly. Not anymore. And for the first time in a very long while, that answer was completely true. I still remembered the ballroom at the Palmer Hotel. The golden lights. The expensive champagne. The sound of people laughing while Jason held a microphone like power itself belonged in his hands forever. But I also remembered something else now. The exact moment the laughter faded once people saw who he truly was beneath the performance. Public humiliation gives some people temporary applause. Character decides what remains after the room becomes quiet again. As Lily finished the last spoonful of her ice cream, my phone buzzed softly inside my purse. A new message from Rebecca appeared across the screen. "Thank you for not giving up on me." I stared at those words for several seconds while late afternoon sunlight shimmered across the lake beside us. Then I placed the phone back into my purse without replying immediately. Some relationships heal loudly. Others heal gently through patience, distance, and truth finally spoken out loud. Lily slipped her small hand into mine as we stood to leave the shop together. The wind coming off the water felt colder now, but I no longer minded the cold. I had spent too many years shrinking myself to keep peace inside rooms where my kindness was mistaken for weakness. Not anymore. Somewhere behind us, the city continued moving exactly as it always had. Traffic lights changed. People hurried home from work. Restaurants filled with conversation and music. Life moved forward without asking permission from pain. I adjusted my coat, smiled down at my granddaughter, and continued walking beside the lake while the Chicago skyline glowed quietly against the evening sky. Some people believe power comes from humiliating others in public. But real power is much quieter than that. Real power is knowing exactly who you are after the applause finally stops.